They talked about the war in Ukraine, threatened with a search and then released without a protocol. In Perm, law enforcement officers detained a street artist, the author of a graffiti list of 37 points about what can and cannot be done in Russia. The list of prohibited things is much longer. These are the graffiti in Perm that the artist Artyom began to place after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But the Russian authorities do not like this kind of dissent.
The fear of Putin and his team to lose their power. He wants to show himself as a leader of Russian society. The support of Russian society is very important to him, and any form of protest plays against this. The Russian government has become authoritarian and is falling into such totalitarianism and has long suppressed various protests for many years, but now with the war it has become a total scale.
Since February 24th, more than 300 criminal cases have been initiated in Russia for anti-war statements and actions. The independent human rights media project OVD Info and the Verstka publication estimated that 378 people have been charged or suspected. 7 of them were minors. More than 100 cases were opened under the article about fakes about the Russian army. Another popular article is vandalism, usually for defacing the letters Z and V. Altogether, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the Russian police have detained 1,443 people at anti-war rallies, and despite this, people are still protesting.
It is a completely natural process of a citizen's resistance to a crime that his state commits against another country, against his own country, against the freedoms of the basic principles of a civilized existence. Whether he is an artist, whether he is a politician, an engineer, or an average resident. However, such resident rarely shows any kind of disobedience, but nevertheless it is a normal process.
Human rights activists note that in the period from February to December the police even practiced detentions for a warning. For example, it carried out raids on public holidays and used the facial recognition system in the Moscow subway. Not so long ago it became known that a Moscow resident was sentenced to a year in prison for writing "Putin is a murderer" on a wall. In September, the courts in Vladimir and Feodosia in similar cases related to anti-war graffiti also sentenced local residents to a year of restriction of freedom. Experts are sure that even single manifestations of disagreement with Putin's aggressive policy play a role.
These actions, these protests are important in such a moral and ethical aspect. We remember how the whole world and people were struck by the demonstration of 5 people in 1968 in the Soviet Union against the entering of troops into Czechoslovakia, and this became some kind of moral example and remained an example of resistance to the authorities.
Human rights activists recommend that even before the action, be sure to take care of your protection.
The first is to draw up a power of attorney, to call a lawyer, so that this legal assistance can be provided when you are detained, to pay attention and record all kinds of violations, to use them later in court, to appeal against such unlawful actions of the power structures.
And the Russian government will continue to tighten the screws. Legislation is getting tougher. The State Duma added several articles to the criminal code on threats to state security, for example on confidential cooperation with foreign states, on public calls for action against state security, on life imprisonment for sabotage and equating them with terrorism. Reported by Serhiy Kulyas, Angelika Brushnevska, UATV News.